All right, we'll call the meeting to order. Marty?
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Castillo? Ms. Gill?
Here.
Ms. Litton? Here. Ms. Russell? And Mr. Webb? Mr. Webb? Thank you. Sorry. Thanks.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, we'll call the...
Flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, would someone please move to adopt the agenda? Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. All those in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is Section 2.01, Public Comments and Requests. In accordance with School Board Bylaw 2.30, the time for each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Additional written statements may be submitted to the clerk for dissemination to board members and for their record. I know we have one in-person public comment. Ms. Goodell, do we have any that came in over email?
Yes, we do. We have one from Mrs. Henderson, who is a parent who was stating that she would like the dress code in the student handbook to be updated to be gender neutral.
Thank you, Ms. Goodell. So our first in-person public comment is Paul Boson and Hannah Jordan.
Good evening. So it is wonderful to be with you here. This is quite a bit more formal than the conference room over at Central Office. And with that, we wanted to come and, from the perspective of welcoming Falls Church, offer you all an update about some plans that we have for the fall. We want to thank you for your past support of different initiatives and partnership and collaboration with us institutionally through our work with FCCPS. And also, we view this as part of an ongoing effort of public outreach to connect with the community, because that's important, because what we're talking about here is how we think, how we feel, how we engage together to build a community of neighbors. So with that said, the big update is I think you all have heard that we have invited Mbolo Mbui, the author of Behold the Dreamers, to Falls Church. That is at the beginning of Welcoming Week in September. So Welcoming Week is the annual occasion when all over the country, communities which are recognizing Welcoming America's effort to welcome immigrants and refugees to the community, organize public activities, public events of different sorts during a given week each fall. So this falls in mid-September. It's actually great timing, because the day that would kick off Welcoming Week here is actually the day of the Falls Church Festival here at Cherry Hill Park. So there'll be a lot of activity, a lot of life in the community, making it a great day, we think, for a public address by Mbolo Mbui, the author of Behold the Dreamers, which will potentially be either at Mason or at MEH. In some capacity presented potentially as a peer at university, although we'll definitely love to work with you all in whatever way makes sense. To take an author who has been uniquely able to connect with the people who've read the book, who I've spoken to. It's really neat to see how the themes in the book weave together and contemplate the contemporary immigrant experience, but also look at the story of a wealthy family in New York. And so, as we look at our community and the way that there's a lot going on here, this book really connects well and quite consistently with people. And so we think it's a great vehicle to encourage people to think deeply and to think about these issues in a more human way than might sometimes be the case. This is not going to be a lecture format. This is not going to be facts and figures, numbers. Hopefully, through literature, we might be able to encourage people to think deeply and think well about these issues. The events of the day will continue with the Mary Riley Stiles Public Library co-sponsoring author signing that will be at the Falls Church Festival. And then up the road at the Tyson's Pimmet Hill Library, they'll be hosting a public talk, which will be more of an author talk. Okay, not so much immigration and the American dream, but more of an author talk at the library, where she first had the idea to write the book. So the author is engaged in this deeply. She's very excited about this, I can tell, and so we think it's a great way to kick off Welcoming Week. The last thing I'll mention, and then I'll hand over to Hannah, is we very much want to connect this to the community and also the school community. So one idea that's percolated, Kevin Clark at George Mason is interested in having the talk filmed and then edited in a way that would make it a good discussion vehicle for the Wild Horse Wednesday to follow the Saturday author talk. So as we look at how Welcoming Week would shape up, that would be yet another activity where we'd be able to reach a different segment of the community, our high school students at Mason. Okay, so glad to take any questions if you have any. Thank you very much for your support. There's more to come, but wanted to offer that update.
Hi, I'm Hannah Jordan, and I don't have much to say to follow up, but we are trying to get some community book groups going, and so we're advertising some of those on our webpage. So I think there's a couple that are already on there, but if you know of anyone or you want to be involved in that, you can come to one or you can host one. We're also recommending the book Refugee by Alan Gratz for the middle school students and perhaps even like 4th and 5th graders or even 9th and 10th graders, just kind of depending on the kid. It's a little more accessible to that middle age range. And my daughter and I are reading it now, and it's awesome. She's a rising 9th grader, and she's really enjoying it. So just wanted to put that out there. Is that about it? And also, we brought your present, and we're going to leave you a copy of the book because, we also talked to the owner of One More Page Books, and they're trying to kind of get involved and recommend it and work with some local teachers who have been teaching the book or in their English classes. I don't even know what school, it might have been in Arlington, but we're about including the community, so that's good. Anyway, so we got some books for you that I'll leave over here, I guess. Thanks.
And finally, let me thank Dr. Noonan for his recommendation to parents and the community in his year-end communication about this book. The impact has been profound. I went over to the Mary Riley Stiles Public Library and we talked about it, and they were delighted to put up a big display about the book right at the checkout desk. I don't know if you've been over there lately, but we also gifted 6 copies of the book to the library, and as of last week, they were all checked out. So, this is not necessarily something that everybody needs to read, but it's really compelling. And now, if you're looking for summer reading, or if you already have the book, please gift it to someone else. So, thank you. Any questions?
Thank you so much. I have read the book, and I passed it on to Dr. Noonan. So we've now both read the book, so we can pass along our 2 copies to someone else here who would like to read it. So next on the agenda is our closed meeting. Would someone please read us into closed? Thank you.
Pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, I move that the board convene a closed meeting for the following purpose: to discuss or consider the identified subject matter, personnel under Section 2.2-3711A, 1, in particular, staff appointment, staff reassignment, staff resignation, staff retirement, staff performance, staff separation, staff change in position, non-reappointments, child care leave, long-term medical leave, and leave of absence, and advisory committee appointments.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Great. Thank you. This should be very brief. Thank you.
Now we just got to figure out where.
All right. Would someone please move to reconvene us to open meeting?
Madam Chair, I move to reconvene.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Litton. Would someone please certify the closed meeting?
Whereas the Falls Church City School Board has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2-3711B of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this school board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved that the Falls Church City School Board hereby certifies that, to the best of each member's knowledge, 1, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirement 5 Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which this certification applies, and 2, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, and considered.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Litton.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Castillo? Aye. Ms. Gill?
Aye.
Ms. Litton? Aye. Ms. Russell? Aye. And Mr. Webb?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have no recognitions or reports this evening. I would ask unanimous consent to approve unanimous approval to approve the consent agenda as presented. Thank you. So next we move on to our business and action information. 7.01 VSBA Media Honor Roll. Dr. Noonan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. There are 2 members in our community that we would like to recognize for the Falls Church Public Schools Media Honor Roll that would ultimately be the Virginia School Boards Association Honor Roll. And the first is Nick Benton, who is the publisher and editor-in-chief for the Falls Church News Press, and also Matt Delaney, who is one of the editors and reporters for the Falls Church News Press. There are 2 resolutions in your packet, and if you're so inclined and would like to read those, you may, but I'll leave that to you. But we would like to recognize Nick Benton and Matt Delaney for their efforts on behalf of the schools.
Thank you, Dr. Noonan. Since they are not present tonight, I will refrain from reading the resolution. Next, we have 7.02. Oh, do we need to approve that? Sorry. Yes. Okay. Would someone please move that the school board approve and adopt the media honor roll resolutions? Sorry. Oh, there's a motion. Sorry. Yeah.
Madam Chair, I move the school board approve and adopt the 2019 VSBA Media Honor Roll Resolution 04-19 and 05-19 as presented, recognizing Nicholas Benton, publisher and editor-in-chief of the Falls Church News Press, and Matt Delaney, news reporter for the Falls Church News Press, for their ongoing and exemplary nature of reporting on the Falls Church City Public Schools to the community.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Russell. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstain? Thank you very much. All right, next we have 7.02, Summer in the City. Dr. Noonan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe Mr. Brett is going to put up the sheet that we sent around. This is the time of year where we love the answer more than the question. And the question is, why don't you guys have the summer off? And the answer is because we're planning a 9-month party in 3 months. And, oh, by the way, we have a ton of stuff going on in the summer here in the City of Falls Church. So like we did last year, I thought it would be a good opportunity to talk through just briefly some of the things that are going on. And we've called it affectionately the Summer in the City the last couple of years. And I'd like to do it again this year. And I'll start with Jesse Thackeray. And these are also up online in board docs, and so you probably have seen them, but for the benefit of the community, I do want to kind of go through them. At Thackeray, we do have a 4-week ESY, or extended school year program, where we're serving 28 students. This summer program is offered certainly to those students that receive ESY or extended school year services, but is also open to any other students that would like to come. The objectives there are really to engage students in play-based learning activities that with a little bit of literacy skill built into there, music and exercise as well. The students that are on extended school year program do receive, as part of that, very specialized instruction. The contact person for those that may be interested is Seamus O'Connor, and Seamus is our coordinator of special education here in the City of Falls Church. That program, like all the others, mostly have started this week. They actually started yesterday. The second one is the Mount Daniel Summer Academy. We're serving 52 students at Mount Daniel this year, and it's a 4-week program to support math and literacy-based skills, specifically focusing around the DRA, or the Developmental Reading Assessment, the PALS, and those students will also engage in some social emotional learning as well. We're focusing a lot of our attention on students that have been in some ways marginalized, not in our schools, but perhaps otherwise. So they're getting some extra additional language support as part of our LEAP program. So we have looked at students that are below the DRA benchmark and are serving those students as well. At Thomas Jefferson, we have the TJ Summer Academy, very similar in terms of the theme from the perspective of what are they working on. They're working on literacy and numeracy. Students are engaged in about 110 minutes of enrichment activities and themes that include wellness at second grade, ocean exploration at third grade, Harry Potter at fourth grade, and we tweeted a really fun picture out from Hogwarts yesterday, and then approximately 60 minutes of RICU, which is the Reading Intensive Care Unit framework for literacy, and about 15 to 20 minutes of time outside. It's not a full-day program, but it is an opportunity for students to really focus. And Shannon Evans, who is one of our reading teachers at Thomas Jefferson, is the person there. At at Mary Ellen Henderson, Hillary Trebles and Rory Dippold are working on a really cool program called Careers. And Careers is where students are participating in 2 problem-based learning, or PBL, you'll see that acronym PBL, problem-based learning units that are focused around careers. And through those problem-based units, students are engaged in mathematics and reading skills that are woven in, as well as the ATLs, which are part of our learning goals with respect to the International Baccalaureate program. Math Block is focusing on certain strands that have been identified based on some of our SOL data from our math teachers to try and boost some skill throughout the summer, but really doing it in a fun, problem-based way. Some of the things that they're most excited about are some of the hands-on field trips, and one of them in particular right next door at the Think A Bit Lab at Virginia Tech. Jim Edgenreiter, or Dr. Edgenreiter, who's over there, does a really outstanding job with that Think A Bit Lab, and it's like a makerspace on steroids. So if you ever have a chance to go see the Think A Bit Lab, it's really a lot of fun. And then George Mason Summer Academy started. It gives students opportunity to extend their learning through a hybrid solution. There are approximately 300 students that are participating. There are some students who are doing it for recovery, credit recovery, students who were not successful in the SOL testing process, but most of the students that are there are doing it for extension and enrichment, and Cynthia Thrush and Steve Knight are the contacts there, and Dave Sorensis and Kevin Clark have been working as the folks that are the points of contact from the administrative perspective. There also is a LEAP Academy that's going on there. It's a 4-week program for students who are identified on the WIDA, which is the assessment for our ESOL students or our LEAP students. If they are 1 through 4, which means that they're still receiving services and they're not released yet from those services, they have been identified, and there are 12 of them that are coming in through the summer. We, again, have our current summer daycare programs going on. Proud to say Betsy, our little Betsy, is participating again this summer at Thomas Jefferson. So she is one of the 120 to 130 students that are participating at Mount Daniel, TJ, and Mary Ellen Henderson. Today, they had an opportunity to go to the pool. They do every week, which is a lot of fun. Tomorrow, they'll go to the Washington Mystics to see the basketball game. But there are tons of fun activities, building birdhouses, making homemade ice cream, s'mores, and every week they have a special guest. And yesterday at Thomas Jefferson, anyway, it was someone who came and showed them how to dance Bollywood style. So they really enjoyed that a lot. And then ESY, the Extended School Year Program, as I indicated earlier at Jesse Thackeray, is also going on at Mount Daniel, Thomas Jefferson, Mary Ellen Henderson, and George Mason. At Mount Daniel, we're serving 20 students, TJ 15, Henderson 15, and George Mason 5. So approximately 50 students are continuing to receive services through the summer through special education. We are offering again this year our Read and Roll program. This is a joint program between our LEAP staff, our school social workers, Mary Riley Stiles Public Library, Falls Church Police Department, and the Ed Foundation, where those folks go into the community, provide books and snacks and opportunities for students to pick up all kinds of literature and literacy tools to work through the summer. We are targeting our bilingual students and our outreach to our LEAP parents, so we've been leveraging the relationships that people like Erica Zabalos and others through the FRC have been able to establish over the last year. Huskies in the Keys. This was a trip where 7th and 8th graders went with Kathleen Johnson. There were 65 of them. Traveled to Florida for 5 days and 4 nights through the World Strides program, and they splashed into science and had a really great time. And they toured the largest turtle veterinary hospital in the United States, which was a lot of fun for them. And I also believe they went to the Dolphin Research Center and had a chance to be at the DRC as well. The Falls Church Ed Foundation, I just want to give them a shout out for their thanks. They do subsidize some funding for some of our students that are able to attend because of their support, their generous support to our daycare program and the Family Assistance Fund. And then lastly, before you know it, we're going to be back at it. August 5th is the starting date for all sports and athletics back at George Mason High School. So golf, cross country, volleyball, field hockey, football, and cheer will all begin again on August 5th. And our coaches and the staff are gearing up for that already. So although it feels like school just let out a week and a half ago, which is pretty close to how long ago it was when school let out, maybe 2 weeks ago, we already are in the throes of making sure we're ready to open our doors next year with some students that have had opportunities not only for intervention and a few receiving some remedial opportunities, but an awful lot of kids are getting tons and tons of enrichment and extension activities here in the city of Falls Church, and it's something I think that's unique to the city and something that you all can be very proud of. So that's my Summer in the City update. I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Any questions from the board? Yes, Mr. Castillo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Noonan, the Huskies in the Keys, was that a school-sponsored program, or was that a non-school-sponsored program?
Great question, and thank you for the clarification. It was not a school-sponsored program. It was something that many of our students participated in, but it was done through the World Strides program and was outside of our purview. So it's not unlike some of our students who have gone to Europe as part of the overseas opportunities. So Kathleen Johnson went, they purchased insurance outside of the schools and were waived out of our purview.
And is that process working pretty well now, the new policy and the revised, updated approach to the non-school sponsored programs?
I do think it is. It continues to be an educational process for folks that have done it the way they've done it in the past. But once we've had an opportunity to meet with them and talk through why and what it looks like, we've been very successful.
Any other questions or comments? Yes. Oh, Ms. Russell, I thought, no. All right. Seeing none, we'll move on to, Mr. Anderson. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Noonan, I just want to make sure I'm getting clear for myself. So there are students who are receiving remedial opportunities, students that are receiving intervention, and students that are receiving just enhanced instructional opportunities. How do each of those groups get notified of the opportunity and told when the timelines are and whether they've been selected or not, that sort of thing?
That's a great question. Typically, it's through the principals, assistant principals, and the school counselors, and it happens before the end of the school year. Those students that need some extra time and support for learning do get a personal invite, and the parents are communicated with, and then there's a decision made whether or not they're able to based on the summer schedules that they may have. And then, for example, at Jesse Thackeray, where we're offering ESY, that's all part of, anywhere there is the extended school year, that's all done through the IEP process as well. So there's a number of different avenues. And then with Thackeray, not all the students that are there are ESY students, so there was an opportunity to put out information through the Jesse Thackeray system to say there are opportunities here if you'd like to participate this summer, and that was before the programs began, so parents could then make a decision. Sure.
All right. No other questions? We'll go on to 7.03, our George Mason High School project update. Dr. Noonan.
Thank you. I'm actually going to turn this over here in just a second to Kristen Michael, our Chief Operating Officer, to give you the project update. But before she does, and I may be stealing her thunder. I hate to do this very cautiously, but we're super excited. This is the week where things are really going to start moving, literally. Dirt is moving and trucks are moving. Unfortunately, we had a little bit of a washout yesterday, as I think everybody did in the region. But today, as I put out on social media last week, small piles are going to become big piles, and they have more than quadrupled in size. So dirt is starting to move, and we're really excited about that. And I think Kristen tonight is going to share with you a high-level timeline and also sort of reiterate what is the transportation process in and out, where do you drop kids off and the like, and she's also going to hit on the parking piece, which continues to be something that comes up in the community. So, Ms. Michael.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and overview of the information I'm going to cover. We're very excited. When you look at the high school project and think back to our groundbreaking on the last day of school, which was June 14th, right, you can't see a lot. You've seen the construction fence go up and it kind of blocks the view looking in, but a lot has really occurred since then. We've received our permit, our site plan, and our foundation to grade permit. We've also erected all of the erosion and sediment control measures, so all of those are in place. So as Dr. Noonan indicated, starting later this week, you'll see significant truck traffic leaving the site hauling away dirt as they start to dig for that foundation 2 stories below ground. So staff continues to work with Gilbane, who's been an excellent partner. We've also been very engaged with the EYA PN Hoffman Regency Group, as undergrounding of utilities on the site is also going to start this week. So all of that work continues, and at the same time, our ASAC, or our Architectural Selection Advisory Committee, is also continuing to meet to work on the project. In May, they met really to understand the basis of design, and then in June, they met to do flooring selections. So their work will continue all summer as well. So when we look at the site logistics as a whole, I know we've shown this information, but we really hope this will be helpful for the community if we look at it one more time. This picture really shows this summer, 2019, and there's a red outline around that lightly shaded area, and that's the construction fence that you'll see. Then you'll see the area down towards the bottom left of this picture in that light blue-green color. That is additional parking that will be added over the summer. So when you look at our parking, which I'm going to cover later in this presentation, and we talk about the level of parking available this summer, it's really important that the community and our students and parents and families understand that when school opens in the fall, we will have the same amount of parking that we currently have available. So that blue-green area is going to become additional parking. So many of you will recognize that areas where our buses had parked previously. So that work will continue over the summer. Also on this map, you'll see in some orange arrows our construction traffic. So when the dirt removal starts this week, those trucks are expected to enter from Broad Street or Route 7, come through the entrance there by Mariel and Henderson. They'll be going up the graphic in this picture towards where our bus turnaround lane used to be. They will enter the construction site there, be filled with dirt. Then they'll go through a wash process where they'll be rinsed off so we're not carrying extra dirt to the rest of our school site. And then they're going to exit across what will be known as Mustang Alley to come out on Haycock. And then from there, they should be continuing to turn right to go back to Broad or 7. They'll go to 7 and then they'll get on 66 headed west. So again, we expect to see significant truck traffic later this week. Gilbane has been an excellent partner in terms of we're going to not have truck traffic whenever we can during both arrival and dismissal. So that'll be an important part as we look at this traffic flow this week. So we just wanted to remind parents who are entering the site as well. So when I talked about that truck traffic coming in, really we know our tightest point in terms of construction traffic, parent traffic, and everything is the entrance from Route 7 near Mariel and Henderson. Right? In addition to that truck traffic that I talked about in parent traffic, we're also going to be undergrounding utilities in that area. And that work is going to occur in the evening starting at 4 p.m. So we've really worked hard to make sure we're impacting our families as least as we possibly can. So to help with that process, what we're asking for our parents who are coming to bring their students to Mariel and Henderson for camps that are in the gym is that they enter our site through the front of George Mason, or the piece of George Mason that abuts Route 7. They'll turn in there and use that access road to get into Mariel and Henderson. They'll They'll go through what will be known as the Husky Loop, dropping their child off for the gym. They'll need to turn right out of there and then turn right onto Route 7. So they will not be able to turn left because that's where all that truck traffic will be, and it'll be headed into the construction site. So then when we look at Mason and the activities that are going on at Mason, which also includes our extended daycare program that's there this summer, parents have two options in terms of going into George Mason. They can use the loop that's in front of the building on the Route 7 side, or they can also use the flagpole entrance from Haycock. Both is shown in these graphics. And then for families that are accessing our stadium field, the access to the stadium field is through a fence that's located behind George Mason as you're coming along Mustang Alley. So what we're asking is families to drop their students that are going to the athletic fields off in front with the flagpole loop. And then they'll be able to take the pedestrian crosswalk, which I'll show in just a minute, walk across the road there, and then enter the field. So that temporary walkway, this is an example of where you enter that stadium field access. We know that currently, when you look at that stadium field access, our signage has room for improvement, right? So currently, there are temporary signage that's up, and we know that that signage is too small, and larger signage has been ordered that'll clearly show that the entrance to the field is this way. So I think the important thing for our community to remember is if you're dropping your student off at Henderson, be sure you're using the Husky Loop in the front of Henderson. And then for Mason and access to the field, use either the loop on the Route 7 side of George Mason or the flagpole loop as you enter from Haycock. So when we look at parking, this is a graphic that shows where the parking is available this summer. And we've used this graphic before, but again, I want to be clear, this is only for the summer. So in the summer, we have the 304 spots available. You can see the parking that was previously in the bus turnaround loop is now with inside Gilbane's construction fence. But I want to be really clear that when school opens in the fall, we will have added all of that additional parking in front of Henderson. So we will have, when school opens, the same amount of parking that we have currently, which is approximately 400 spaces. So we're very excited about this construction project, all of the dirt that we expect to be removed later this week. Even with the day of washout rain, Gilbane is really confident about their schedule and the additional work that we'll do this week. And we're also very grateful for our partnership with EYAP and Hoffman as we work to underground utilities that will benefit both the school and the economic development site.
I'm going to add to that because I think it's important also to note that EYAP and Hoffman is going to begin some of their undergrounding of utilities. And I don't know if you mentioned that or not.
I briefly mentioned it. They're actually going to start the process for setting manholes on Thursday.
Okay.
So you'll see them actually cutting areas in the concrete. You'll see it in the parking areas in front of Henderson, closest to Route 7. And then in the areas currently right now where we have maintenance trucks and buses parked between Henderson and George Mason. They then will start next week at Monday working in the evenings from 4 p.m. on. And they'll first lay the 3 manholes that go in that area, and then they will underground the utility corridors underneath there. I'm trying to complete all of that work between those 2 schools before school resumes in the fall.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Michael. It's very impressive, the amount of work you've all done this summer and keeping our students so safe while we still run all of our usual programs up there. So thank you. Any comments or questions from the board? Yes, Ms. Litton.
I have a question that you may not know the answer to. And I'm asking it mostly just kind of out of curiosity and because I've watched Founders Row. Kind of all those trucks come in the morning and they park, it seems like in the Staples parking lot. You know, I didn't know if we were going to have a similar thing where there's a bunch of trucks come somewhere and, you know, are parked and then do the load and go.
I actually think that's an excellent question, and it was one of the things we discussed this morning when we were at the site looking at site logistics. In the morning, if the trucks get there and we have places that they need to queue up, what they'll do is they'll go inside the Gilbane construction area and they'll actually queue there. So when we look at this map, if I go all the way back to the beginning. Oops. They'll be queuing up in that light shaded area just above the blue future parking. So they'll actually enter inside the Gilbane construction fence and wait there.
Mr. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to pick up again on the parking, so by the time school starts in the fall, we'll be back to the 400. Is that a level we're going to be able to maintain throughout the process as we go all the way through into the beginning of the demolition of the old high school and moving into phase one of the new construction?
So we'll have all of that parking on site and available to us until the demolition of the current high school starts. At that point, we've been talking with both Virginia Tech and WMATA in terms of ensuring that we can purchase or have parking from them that will allow us to continue our parking until the trapezoid area can be built.
Thank you.
Just to further put a even finer point on it, it's for a semester. It's not for a full year. So it would be the second semester of that last year because the trapezoid will be done that final summer.
So in terms of the additional parking that's going to open in the fall to bring us to the 400-plus spaces, has there been any thought in terms of how we're going to be distributing the parking in terms of student parking, staff parking, visitor parking, et cetera?
So our intention is to take the spaces that are currently along Mary Ellen Henderson that are currently labeled for our ASAP program and to make those visitor parking spaces, since parents tend to use them either before school or after school in terms of drop-off and pickup. So that will give us some visitor spaces right there. We don't anticipate having any changes to student parking. We know that overall we've been selling fewer student parking spaces, but between the current space that we have available for seniors and juniors, we know that should accommodate all of the student parking that we need. When we look at adding this additional parking, we will have some staff people that will be parked a little bit farther away from the building than they were before. But when we've surveyed our principals looking at how much parking we use on our site every day, we know that we have more parking spaces than we currently use on an average day, looking at all of our staff, students, and visitors. So we are confident that we'll be able to serve everyone with parking on the site during the school day.
And just a follow-up question with regard to the student parking. Has there been any determination on whether we're going to continue with the assigned spots or if we're going to be doing away with that and having it be an open lottery?
We're doing away with assigned spaces. And the reason that we are is it's a completely inefficient way to park. So if you have 10 students that are out, for example, that's 10 spaces that aren't used, that could be used for anyone who came into the site. So for the foreseeable future, we look like we're going to move away from assigned spaces. So students will just need to get there a little bit earlier to get closer.
And then I guess with regard to that, arrangement, how are we going to patrol in terms of who's eligible to park there and who's not? Because obviously you're paying for a parking spot and currently, you're either there or you're not. And if someone else is in your spot, then that person's probably not supposed to be there. But I mean, it seems with having, unassigned spots that there's a greater chance of people parking who are not paying for it.
They'll still need to display their parking pass. So we would be monitoring the parking passes. And if cars are there without the parking pass, we'll take appropriate action.
Yes, Mr. Webb.
With regard to staff parking, do we do any encouraging or do we have any numbers on how many of our staff potentially take advantage of public transportation to the George Mason, Mary Ellen site?
We don't currently have information about how many staff take public transportation. We have talked about innovative ways to encourage people to carpool, to ride together, to do things to encourage people to track their steps and really use the additional steps that they're taking, or other ways to look at incentivize or rewarding people for whether it's carpooling or other recognition. So we really are thinking through opportunities in terms of seeing this as a positive situation.
And one additional question, remind me where the new bus parking is going to be at.
We're very excited. The city has been very supportive in terms of our buses. We're currently parking buses at their property yard. They've been very gracious in terms of their fence was moved. They've restriped all the spots for us. They've put in stop guards. And we currently have a large number of our buses there. So we're super thankful to Robert and all the staff at the city who've been super great in terms of helping us get our buses there. So with that property yard parking and then the parking directly adjacent to Mary Ellen Henderson up against George Mason, between those two sites, we believe we can serve all of our buses on our campuses and at the property yard.
I'm just adding, I'm not correcting, because you're absolutely right. One modification that we will make while some of the undergrounding is happening by EYA for the summer is we may move some of our buses down from between Mary Ellen Henderson and George Mason down to the Haycock parking lot, and that would just be temporary through the summer.
Yeah, and we'll have to move them because one of the manholes is directly under where the buses are parking. So we'll get a week-by-week schedule from them, but that manhole laying will actually occur next week. So you'll see some of those buses in that lot by Haycock as soon as later this week.
And I think some of them might already be there starting today. When I went by today, that lot was full of buses.
Yeah, and when we met with transportation this morning, one of the things we talked about was to help people start planning for being there after they did their runs this afternoon, to immediately start trying to park them in Haycock so we could be sure that we were ready. So when they started doing the undergrounding of utilities, we would be ready to welcome them onto our site.
All right, if that's it from the board, we'll move on to our next three items. We're going to discuss together, and then we'll take a motion on each one individually, since they're all three related. So that's going to be signing of the land exchange agreement between Falls Church City School Board and Falls Church City, Virginia, signing of deed of re-subdivision, vacation, rededication, dedications and conveyances, and signing of deed of lease between Falls Church City School Board and Falls Church City, Virginia. Dr. Noonan.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Before we take these three items up for discussion and final approval, I want to just take a second to thank a couple of people for their extraordinary work on these three items, starting with Tricia Minson, our in-house counsel. She, along with Jeremy Root, who's our outside counsel, have worked incredibly hard, along with Carly Aubrey, who's here tonight, and Carol McCostry from the city side, general government side as well, to make sure that these land exchange re-subdivisions, vacations, rededications, dedications, conveyances, and the final signing of the deed of lease work well and within the scope of what we're trying to all accomplish with the site at the high school and the economic development side. So these became a little bit tricky because there was an awful lot of conversation and a lot of coordination between multiple entities. But the folks that I mentioned did extraordinary work to pull all of that together to get us where we are today. So last night, the City Council did take these up and did very quickly, no pressure, but I just want you to know it was done very quickly, did move ahead with approving each of those in a 6-0 vote last night. The motions that you have tonight before you are actually identical to the motions that essentially the council passed last night. So you're essentially approving the same thing that they approved last night. This is important work because it is essentially the land swap. And then also the whole idea of now that we're doing this land swap, our current high school won't sit on school board property. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Tricia Minson to make a couple of explanations and answer any questions that you might have that have come up. But I did want to start with just saying thank you to them for their extraordinary work.
Thank you. Good evening. The documents that are in front of you tonight and that the City Council approved yesterday evening are three separate documents that relate to the exchange of the land where the school is currently located and where the fields are currently located. As you all know, the fields where our students play right now are currently owned by the city, and that's where the new high school is going to be built. And the land where the high school, the majority of the land where the high school is currently sitting is going to turn into economic development. So the first document that is before you tonight is the exchange agreement. That agreement takes the land that is currently titled in the school and gives it to the city, and takes the land that's currently titled in the city and gives it to the school. This document was last presented to the board in public work session on June 18th, and there are a very few minor changes to the version that was presented on the 18th work session and this evening. They include removing a reference to parcel C and incorporating a reference to the deed of lease, which we'll discuss as the last document. But we thought it was important to reference that here, and the exchange agreement is also going to be an attachment exhibit to the deed of lease that the school board and the city will be entering into for the high school after the city owns the land on which the old high school is located. And I'm happy to take any questions about the exchange agreement or to talk about the next document and then take them all together. Any pressing questions about the exchange agreement? Hearing none. Yes, Mr. Castillo.
Thank you, Ms. Minson. The word dedicate comes up a lot in this document.
Yes.
And what, I have to admit, I've never seen that in real estate documents. What does it mean to have things like dedicating land?
My understanding, and part of why Jeremy Root was involved, is he is a land lawyer and does this every day. It's giving a certain purpose for the land. So I know the next document, the deed that's re-dividing the property, talks about specific dedications and rededications of the property. And those rededications include public access for utilities and easements that are necessary. One of the attachments to the deed of lease actually shows all of those dedications. So it is on board docs, it is a small document, but it shows where all the roads are located, where all of the easements are located, where there's supposed to be utilities. Does that partially answer your question?
Well, I guess if there's an easement, there's an easement, so you don't need to dedicate it to have the easement, right? Dedication doesn't imply particular use, because that would be what zoning's for, right?
That's true, but there is a specific dedication within the deed of re-subdivision, vacation, rededication, dedications, and conveyances that specifically dedicates the easement in this legal document for public access and utilities. So whether it's there, was there before, it is being rededicated in the second document that's before the board.
Okay, I'll take you at your word there.
And I'm also happy to, part of the language that's before the board tonight is that the board is going to be approving these subject to any non-material changes recommended by the superintendent. So if you do want to reach out to Mr. Root, I'm happy to put you in touch with him, since this is what he does every day, and he might be able to assuage your concerns as it comes to dedications.
No, I don't think that'll be necessary, thanks.
Okay. Anything else on the exchange agreement? All right, the deed of re-subdivision, vacation, rededication, dedications, and conveyances is the second document before the board tonight. This is quite similar to what was presented to the board at the work session on June 18th. The major changes here were to add a definition to school board parcel D, make that a defined term to make it more consistent throughout the document, and then to add the legal descriptions of the land that was being conveyed based on the title search. Any questions about this deed of re-subdivision? And those go hand in hand, those first two documents go hand in hand with the deed of lease. And in working through this with Ms. McCoskey and Mr. Root, who have been immensely helpful, we realized that we are going to be, the city will be owning the land, part of the land that the school is located on until the new high school is built. So we've put together a deed of lease that shows the city is leasing that land back to the school board at no cost until the date in which we believe the new high school will be finished, and it'll be time to hand over the land to the city so the economic development team can demolish the high school and then have the economic development portion built. So on page 4, you'll see that there is rent outlaid beginning on August 4th, 2021. This is consistent with the comprehensive agreement that the city entered into with EYA, providing for payment per day for leasing back the high school in the unlikely event of a catastrophic incident. The rent would be escalated as of that first day of August 4th, 2021, to be $7,000 per day through July 31st, 2023. We have confirmed that our insurance would cover any amounts that are owed up to $10 million, so certainly for the $7,000 a day for the 2.5 years, if it came to that. So we would be covered by insurance in the unlikely event that something happened to the new high school before we were able to move students in, so we could stay in the current George Mason High School, but EYA would be compensated for their inability to begin their project on time as planned. So it took some finagling and some creative thinking to work in how do we make sure that we pay the city back for any damages that they will then owe to EYA in the event that EYA is not able to start on time. So that's why there's the escalated rent provisions in here. But otherwise, we tried to make this as straightforward as possible, where the city will be the landlord, but it's still our property. Our maintenance will be maintaining it. Our schools will be going on there until we no longer need that space and are moved into the new high school.
Can I just
Absolutely.
further add to what you've already said, and just to even clarify, I think, for anyone who might be watching at home, we have insurance, we have construction insurance. So during the construction project, if something happens, Gilbane's construction, insurance pays for that. This insurance that Ms. Minson is contemplating is after we've taken possession of the building. So all of the construction is done. We now own it. Substantial completion is over, and we are getting ready to move in. So the window of opportunity for something catastrophic to happen is literally a week, maybe two, of time. So this insurance would pick up that 1 to 2 week window between when we take possession of the building and when we are moving into the building. One reason that window could be extended, however, is if there is, Gilbane doesn't have to complete the project and give us substantial completion until the summer of 2021. They're pushing really hard to get it to us early, but if, for example, Gilbane were to substantially complete the building in March and we couldn't move until the summer, that would extend that period of time where we would be at risk, but we do have the insurance during that period of time. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, that it really is just for the time after we've taken possession of the building, substantial completion is done, and we're getting ready to move in.
So I know those documents are quite lengthy, but happy to take any questions on either specifically the deed of lease with the city or the other two, the exchange agreement or the deed of re-subdivision.
It will surprise nobody to know I've got a few questions on these, I'm sure. But I guess I'll start with a very top-level one. What's the order of operations for the signing of these three documents to make sure that they all come together right?
We will sign them all at the same time. I don't know if the city signed them last night or if they were still making one or two minor tweaks to it, but once we get a signed copy from them, we will sign and then hold them in escrow until they go to closing and they're recorded. So they'll be signed and recorded all together, but we'll hold on to them until we pass them along and have a title company there. We do have title insurance for covering the land that will now be ours, so that's all already set up and in place once we get that finalized. And the deed of lease was written to give us through August 31st of this year. In the event there are some questions or we do see a tweak that we need to make in any of these documents, so we don't have to come back to the board as long as it's not a material change. And then we can still go forward with all three of these documents being recorded and entered into the land records.
Okay, thanks. A couple of things down into looking at the lease for getting the school.
Sure.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand. Under Section 7 in the alterations, this is on page 6. 7.2 says that any permitted alteration, 7.1 describes what a list of permitted alterations would be, including replacements, repairs, et cetera. And then 7.2 says that any permitted alteration shall be performed by independent, duly qualified, licensed, insured, and bonded contractors. I just want to make sure that there's a common understanding. Does that in any way say that facilities staff are not allowed to do sort of routine maintenance in any sort of a form?
No, it's our expectation that facility staff will be doing it, and that provision does say it's those contractors selected by tenant and tenant's sole discretion. So if we determine that we want our facility staff to do it, our facility staff will be able to maintain the building.
Okay, that's, I think that, and then you already addressed the question I was going to ask about the rent, which basically was, do we have sufficient cover in case any of those circumstances were to kick in? So I'll let that one go, I think. Thank you very much, and I will just say, just thank you very much for all the hard work that I know that you and Mr. Root have put in on this one, and the work that Carly and Carol have put in on this one. It's been a tremendous amount of work, I know, and watching it go through has been very impressive. So thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board before we move on to the resolutions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just noticed after reading along with
Yes.
Vice Chair about the discussion of 7.2.
Yes.
7.3 talks about the premises is in substantial compliance with the requirements of ADA.
Yes.
And how is that possible, given what the premises are?
My understanding is that the premises are in compliance with the ADA currently as required when the new construction, when different pieces of the high school were renovated. So this isn't saying that right now it's fully ADA compliant, but it technically is because the last renovations that were made to the project had at the time, ADA requirements in place.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
All right, if there are no further questions or comments, we'll move on to, start with 7.04, the signing of the land exchange agreement between Falls Church City School Board and Falls Church City, Virginia. Would someone please move to authorize the chair to sign the land exchange agreement? Shauna?
I move that the school board authorize the school board chair to sign the land exchange agreement between the Falls Church City School Board and the City of Falls Church, Virginia, as presented, subject to changes approved by the superintendent that do not adversely affect the school board's position.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Ms. Liddon. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstained? Great, thank you very much. Next, 7.05, signing of the deed of re-subdivision, vacation, rededication, dedications, and conveyance. Would someone please read that motion?
I move that the school board authorize the school board chair to sign the deed of subdivision, or re-subdivision, vacation, rededication, dedications, and conveyances between the Falls Church City School Board and the City of Falls Church, Virginia, as presented, subject to changes approved by the superintendent that do not adversely affect the school board's position.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. A second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? All right. Last one, the signing of the deed of lease between Falls Church City School Board and Falls Church City, Virginia. Mr. Webb?
Madam Chair, I move that the school board give authorization to the superintendent to enter into a deed of lease with the City of Falls Church, Virginia, for the purpose of leasing the space of the existing George Mason High School at 7124 Leesburg Pike, Falls Church, Virginia, as presented, subject to changes approved by the superintendent that do not adversely affect the school board's position.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstained? Great, thank you very much. That's a pretty historic 3 resolutions that we just authorized. So, thank you, Ms. Aubrey. All right, next on the agenda, 7.07, second reading and adoption of policies. Ms. Minson.
Good evening. The policies for second reading tonight are those that were brought last month in June. The first 3 relate to textbook selection, adoption, and purchase. The first of those is policy IIAA. This is one piece of our new proposed model policy that would replace the current policy 6.17. And as Jeannie Seabridge and I shared last meeting, it's quite consistent with what we currently do. It goes above and beyond what the the 6.17 policy is required, and there were no changes to this policy, IIAA, after the last meeting. Are there any questions about this first policy, textbook selection, adoption, and purchase? Hearing none. The second textbook policy is policy IIA. This is the breakout of policy 6.17, discussing instructional materials. We did add the word "to" on line 11, but otherwise there were no changes to this policy on the adoption of instructional materials from last meeting. Any questions on policy IIA? All right. The last textbook selection policy is IIAB, supplementary material selection and adoption. There were also no changes from the last meeting, and this is consistent with what we have been doing. And this language mirrors very closely our current policy, 6.17. Questions on IIAB? Okay. Next policy is GCQA, non-school employment by staff members. This policy is quite similar to what our previous policy 8.58 had been. The part that was not included in this policy that was in 8.58 is included in our conflicts of interest policy, GAH. Any questions about policy GCQA? Next is policy GCBD. This is staff leaves and absences. This would replace our current policy 8.78. And it is our hope that over the course of the summer, we can bring to you some of the other policies and regulations, or bring all of the regulations that we have up in line with the VSBA model policies, and make sure that we don't have so many. I think right now we have 13 different regulations and a few policies that do cover staff leaves and absences. At the meeting in June, you all did adopt the Family Medical Leave Act policy. So this is working towards getting all of the personnel policies up to date and consistent with the VSBA model policies. Any questions on GCBD? Okay. Policy GCBEA, leave without pay. This policy is different than what our previous regulation had been in some regards, but is fully consistent with required law. And this covers just that short period of time for staff members who would otherwise be eligible for FMLA or family medical leave prior to them completing 12 months of service. It does require that the employees obtain approval prior to taking leave, which we do think is going to be important for us managing, having substitutes available, and it also references the policies that the board has already adopted on the military leave and benefits. Any questions on GCBEA? All right. The last policy for the evening is GA. This policy, there were a number of questions at the last board meeting. Previously, the board had adopted GA, and then there were changes to the Virginia Code at 22.179.8, which is referenced down at the bottom, that incorporated the ESSA, which is the new federal law for No Child Left Behind. So while our policy previously had just been those lines 4 through 6, now we're proposing adding lines 8 through 30. At the meeting in June, someone had asked whether we could change line 9 to say that current employees, contractors, and agents of the school board may not assist a current or former school board employee in obtaining a new job if. I did have a chance to speak with Elizabeth Ewing at the VSBA on that. She and I both agree that this goes further than the law requires, but is certainly within the board's purview if you all wanted to add the language current or former. So I have added that in red at line 9 if that's the will of the board. I do think that that makes sense. This is the situation where a staff member has probable cause to believe that the former member or the current school board employee has engaged in sexual misconduct with a minor or with a student in violation of the law. So I want to get to that piece about probable cause, but as it relates to current school board employees or former school board employees, I think it'd be fine to make that clarification at line 9. As far as the use of the phrase probable cause, That is a little disconcerting. It's a criminal law term. It's a term that even lawyers would want to look up, what is the case law and what are the requirements there. But the phrase probable cause comes directly from ESSA at the 20 USC 7926, and then is incorporated also into the Virginia Code at 22.1, 79.8. And I do think that it makes sense to keep probable cause as the standard. It's a higher standard, so it protects the school board more, so you'd have to really know that something had happened in order to prohibit any employee, or contractor, or agent from giving a recommendation for a new job. From the dais at the last school board meeting, there'd been a discussion of, should we make that word a little bit more user-friendly, say reasonable suspicion or reason to believe? Because that's a lower standard, I think that makes it more difficult for the board and doesn't protect the board, because how do we know what all of our staff members might have reason to believe or not? At the same time, as part of my annual training of staff, I share, I talk about the mandatory reporting requirements, I talk about grooming behaviors, things to look out for, what we can do to protect our students. So I think one way to strike the balance of using the term probable cause here would be for me to include in my annual training that if anyone has any reason to believe that any staff member has engaged in sexual misconduct with any of our students or with any juveniles or with any minors, they need to immediately let CPS know or let their supervisor know, who's then required under mandatory reporting laws to report that. It's challenging because the language that's used here at lines 12, 13, and 14 isn't the same language that's used for mandatory reporting, but I think we could handle that in training by making sure staff knows that we are here to protect our students above all else, and that's covered in mandatory reporting, which is part of our policies and part of their obligation and their legal obligation, and in this policy GA. Does that solve some of the questions on GA? Are there any other questions or concerns with this policy, personnel policies goals?
Thank you, Ms. Minson. The probable cause phrase, so that's a very helpful explanation. I just wanting to make sure if we're putting a policy in place that holds staff to a standard like that they know they have the supports and the training necessary to know, like, where do they go if they aren't sure if they have probable cause or not, if they just have some sort of a reasonable basis for suspicion, how do they know what to do next, I guess is really where I am on this one, is making sure that we're putting in that scaffolding, that framework of training and contacts that they know they can reach out to when they have a concern on this one.
Absolutely. I think that can be included in training, and I know that I have staff members call me, that Dr. Noonan does, that many central office staff are contacted by principals and support staff and others. So I'll make sure that that's part of the training that we make all staff engage in.
Yeah, because clearly we want to be protecting the students and protecting other minors, but also, making sure that we're providing that support for the staff to be able to do that protection and
Absolutely.
and guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just think that probable cause, in addition to the fact that it's, it's the standard for getting an arrest warrant or a search warrant, will leave gaps. And, if there's a potential for connecting dots with reasonable suspicion, that won't happen with probable cause. And so it has the potential to let certain things slip through. And I think that's problematic. And I think the training could try to sort of elide and kind of say, if you have reasonable suspicion,
Right.
please say something.
Yeah.
But if that's what we're going to train people to do, why don't we just say that in the policy?
I would be concerned about saying that in the policy because it could impute to the board certain knowledge that's never been reported to the board. So if a staff member has a suspicion or feels uncomfortable or is worried or doesn't know and doesn't do anything about it. And you're right, that's the kind of situation that we would expect that they would report and follow up on. But I think that it is important to align with the Virginia Code and the federal code here for probable cause. And then when it goes through at lines 15 to 30 and talks about those situations in which there may have been probable cause, but you can still give a recommendation or a routine transmission of personnel files. If there's been probable cause in order to file a criminal case, but then the law enforcement agency has investigated it and either closed the case, or the prosecutor has looked into it and chosen not to charge, that then allows us to say, we've done everything we need to do, we've turned it over, the prosecutor has determined that there is not, that the probable cause that we initially reported that they were going to pursue was not sufficient in order to prevent us from passing along the personnel administrative file or the recommendation. So I think there could always be that little bit of a gap, but I do think it's important for the board's expectations to align with the Virginia code there, because I think we could be opening the board up for liability in another situation.
And how would we open ourselves up for liability? If we say you have reasonable suspicion and the employee doesn't act on that, what would our liability be? If we said do this and people don't do it?
I'm not sure how we would be able to enforce I think having the higher standard of probable cause, and Elizabeth Ewing thought so too, allows us to bring it before me as the attorney and to do research of what do we know, why do we know it, have we let CPS know, have we let the police know, have they been involved, are they pressing charges, having a conversation with the prosecutor of how they're going to pursue it, and we can then call the Commonwealth Attorney and say, is this enough? What do you want from us? Here's all of our records, and they can make that determination. And then we can go back to the staff member and say, thank you for letting us know it's been resolved, or we will take it from here. We'll handle what needs to be done as far as recommendations or anything else. But I think, given the number of staff members we have, given the experiences that we've had in the past, I want to make sure that we're very tight on it. If you're not sure, and as part of our training, you let your supervisor know, you come to Dr. Noonan, you come to me, we will do a full investigation, we will do everything we can to protect our students. But the standard of the board in passing along a recommendation letter of a current or former employee would be, has there been probable cause as established by the law, as required by the federal and the state code, to prevent us from passing along the personnel files or transmitting the administrative files of this individual. And frankly, this isn't going to change anything of what we've been doing in my 2.5 years here and Dr. Noonan's 2 years here. There's never been a situation where we've taken an easy road out. We've addressed these head on.
Ms. Minson, could part of the liability or the opening up to further scrutiny of the school board be the opposite direction, where perhaps a file isn't transmitted because there was reasonable suspicion and it didn't rise to the standard of probable cause, which is in code? And
then we
could
get
that
into
come back into a libel or
maybe defamation,
slanderish
or it doesn't rise to the level and the board is overreaching. There's sometimes staff members who we just don't think have done a sufficient job, but it doesn't rise to the level of having probable cause or thinking that any students are harmed, but it could insinuate or it could impact an individual's ability to get employment afterwards, and I think that is a possibility.
Okay, but I'll challenge that. I mean, if you have a good faith belief that there is something amiss, as long as that belief is held sincerely and is not done with the prerequisites for
Malice or-
defamation,
right.
then that exposure shouldn't really be a concern, should it?
But then how is that reasonable belief different than probable cause? I think that's where you get into the semantics of, once you talk about the criminal law term or the criminal law standard of probable cause, it allows us to then look at case law and see what are other situations where there has been probable cause that are similar to this, and does it rise to that level? And in getting either a Commonwealth Attorney's opinion on it or making sure that we've reported it to CPS and that our files are available to the police if they did want to press charges, I think, particularly because this is what's required by the Virginia Code and what the other local school boards would be doing, I could see a situation where if we used a more broad term, reasonable suspicion or reason to believe, and then didn't pass along an employee or personnel file, and a staff member, former employee, comes back and says, well, that insinuated that there was probable cause when it didn't rise to that level, and we get into a factual debate of what happened and when, I don't think that I'd rather not be using our resources for that when, if we get into that situation, I will be very involved, and we'll be working with the CPS, and we'll be working with the Commonwealth Attorney, and CPS will have made a finding of founded or unfounded, and we'll be able to act on that, and we will pursue all those necessary courses that we always have done and will always do. But I do strongly urge that the board keep with the probable cause language.
Okay, I mean, I guess sort of where I end up is this is probably not the right policy to, I mean, if there are suspicions or concerns, those should be transmitted and investigated. If you're getting to the employment referral stage, I assume at that point, if other processes have gone on and there were concerns that were sent on to the Commonwealth's attorney that were, reasonable suspicion, and the Commonwealth attorney said, we don't have enough to go on.
Right.
I have to say, even there, the gap between what the prosecutor would charge, and I'm sure that there have been instances where you really do know,
Yeah.
but you can't prove that there's a problem.
Right.
That's what concerns me.
Or
is that-
instances where someone has left their employment prior to an investigation being completed, we still would always finish an investigation, but might not be able, if we don't have the cooperation of the employee, because they've already left their employment, to see that all the way through. So when I represented other divisions as outside counsel, sometimes there'd be separation agreements with staff members that otherwise wouldn't have been leaving on the best terms. I think that by having GA in our quiver, we can turn around and on counsel for any employee and say, no, it's part of our policy and part of the Virginia Code that if we have probable cause, we cannot transmit this employee's personnel record. And here, we do think it rises to that level. But even there, I would be involved. So I don't think that having the language probable cause would limit our staff members to say, well, I'm not quite sure what that means, so I'm not going to do anything. I think coupled with training, if there's a concern or an inkling or a issue or a suspicion, that's going to be reported to our administrators, to Dr. Noonan, and I'll help with determining what do we do next.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments on that policy? All right, is that the
That was the
one?
last
Okay.
for the second reading policy.
All right, so if there are no further questions or comments, then I would ask for a motion to approve second reading and adoption of the policies just discussed.
I move that the school board approve second reading and adoption of policy ITAA, textbook selection, adoption and purchase, IIA, instruction materials, IIAB, supplementary materials selection and adoption, GCQA, non-school employment by staff members, GCBD, staff leave and absences, GCBA, leave without pay, and GA, personnel policy goals.
Thank you, Ms. Liddon. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? To 7.08, the first reading of policies.
There are two policies for first reading tonight. The first is policy GBEC, GFCH, KGC. These are the policies that we had previously come before the board on tobacco products, nicotine vapor products, and e-cigarettes. And the board had adopted these policies last year in September. And now the Virginia Code has consolidated those, so the VSBA consolidated those policies and makes all tobacco products and nicotine vapor products all together. The one thing I did want to point out to the board about this policy, as in addition to removing 3 policies and consolidating them into one policy, it does put the superintendent at line 11 of GBEC. The superintendent is responsible for developing regulations that contain provisions for enforcement of the policy among students, employees, and visitors. including enumeration of possible sanctions or disciplinary actions and referrals to resources to help staff and students overcome tobacco addiction. So assuming the board approves this policy for first reading tonight and then does adopt it next month, I will work with Dr. Noonan to make sure that we have met with our principals and have put together regulations that can help the supervisors and administrators in enumerating the possible sanctions and coming up with lists of referrals that we can give to staff and to students. But otherwise, this policy is consistent with the previous policy of saying that students and staff members cannot use tobacco or nicotine vapor products on school grounds, and others can't on school grounds as well. Students and staff also cannot at off-site school-sponsored activities. So the language and the requirements of this are similar to what was enumerated in the three previous policies.
I did have to laugh when we looked at this update from VSBA after having that long drawn-out conversation about a year ago about how do we define a nicotine vapor product, and then they came out with a definition of what it was.
Yeah.
Where were you a year ago?
Yeah.
Yes, Ms. Russell?
I just had, I guess, a comment/request. Assuming we approve the policy and at the point that the regulations are developed, is that something that I guess Dr. Noonan and yourself could come back to the board with just to present what the regulations are? Because I think it's a pretty hot topic in our community. And so I think that that's something that we would definitely want to just understand what's being put in place in terms of the regulations.
I'd certainly be happy to share the regulation with you after it's done.
Any other questions? Mr. Castillo?
Well, in the theme of trying to keep up with developments in the marketplace, there are vapors that are not nicotine as well. How are we going to catch up with that one?
Yeah. It does say at line 24, while it does say container of nicotine in solution or other form that is intended to be used with or without an electronic cigarette, electronic cigar, electronic cigarillo, electronic pipe, or similar product or device, and anything that's regulated by the FDA. But I, between now and second reading, I'd be happy to look into whether there's vapor products that don't have nicotine that aren't regulated by the FDA. And then we can see if we need to add some more language on that.
Yeah, I mean, the CBD pods being the obvious
Okay.
issue.
CBD pods, okay. I'm going to do
We'll
some
take that
learning.
back. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, this could be an ongoing policy that we just bring back as new products come out. Thank you for raising that. Anything else on GBEC?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have kind of a dumb question just in formatting. Lines 141 to 148 are, they're the ones that aren't struck out and they are highlighted, and I wasn't sure how to interpret all of that, so.
Oh, let's see. That's a good point. These are notes for me that this has been removed from the model policy, but it's still something that I think that we should do. So I shouldn't have left it here, but I want to make sure that we still have these requirements, that we still include this information in the student and employee handbooks, that we still have the no smoking signs posted. Oh, and actually, the one at 143 to 146 was removing the requirement. I did speak to Ms. Ewing about this. The Virginia Code had previously required a no smoking sign in all cafeterias, and that was back when there could be portions of the school that were smoking. So now that all schools are smoke-free, there's no longer a requirement for no smoking signs in the cafeteria, but there is still an expectation, and I think it still makes sense to have no smoking signs around the school building, the perimeter, saying that it's a no smoking area. But that was my note to myself that still's left in there.
So ignore the highlighted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else on GBEC? I am kind of sad that we did such good work on those 3 policies and to bring a policy that doesn't delete the number of policies that we still have to go. But sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and that's okay. Okay, the final policy for this evening is GAD, access to employee social media accounts. The policy this would replace is policy 8.23.1. The language is virtually exactly the same from our current policy to this model policy. The short version of this is the school board does not require current or prospective employees to disclose their username or passwords to social media accounts. They're not required to add an administrator as a friend or to their list of contacts. If a school board or a school board employee inadvertently receives an employee's username or password or other login information, they are to not use that information, though the board will not be liable for having the information if it happens to be on the computers. But there's also at lines 14 to 15, the policy does not prohibit, 14 and 15 says the school board is not prohibited from viewing information about current or prospective employees that are otherwise publicly available. And finally, the policy does not prohibit the school board from requesting access to an employee's username and password for the purpose of conducting a formal investigation or a related procedure into an allegation that the employee has violated federal, state, or local laws or regulations or the board's written policies. I do think that it's important that we keep that, and it's something that I know most local boards do have, and it is word for word consistent with our current policy 8.32.1. Questions on policy GAD?
Yeah, Mr. Castillo?
Madam Chair, well, the line 16 part says we can request it. Doesn't say they have to provide it, and what happens if they don't.
That's true.
And maybe we want to be clearer about that, or not. Which sort of dovetails with the second issue, and that is, and maybe we have it in another policy, and I'm just so confused by throwing out all the letters, all the numbers and
you're-
putting in letters.
if you're confused,
Do
then
we
I am
have a
too.
policy that says what you can and can't and should and shouldn't do with social media? Or is that being handled at the superintendent? I mean, I know there are policies about that.
We don't have a
But-
social media policy, and that was something you had actually raised
Right.
about a year and a half ago, and I've been able to pull some from the Council of School Attorneys as things have come up, and that's one that I'm hoping that we look into and add. It's not a policy that the VSBA has put something together on, so it's going to require some kind of pulling from other divisions to determine if that's what we want to do. But I am hoping that sometime this school year during a work session, we can bring that to see if that's something the board would like me to spend time on. As far as your initial question of do we want to say that an employee has the right to refuse, I think it's better left unsaid. And if an employee doesn't want to share that information, then we assess that or address that at the time. But I do think it's important to say that there is a policy that the school board isn't prohibited from asking. So it's not an invasion of someone's First Amendment rights if we say, will you please provide this to us?
Maybe if we have probable cause, we can do it.
Criminal probable cause? Does there have to be a criminal issue at stake? Yeah.
I will note to your question about the social media policy, having worked in another school division about 7 years ago where we were trying to develop a social media policy as social media was developing, and it continues to develop, and sort of almost like the vaping, it expands as much as it doesn't, as anything else. It's really difficult to figure out what the right policy is with respect to how social media can be used by teachers especially, because there is a lot of instructional information that's shared over social media. There is Instagramming that happens, there is Twitter that's happening, and the like. So I'm open to having the conversation to look at it, but I'm more inclined to fall back on some of our ethical and professional expectations that we have of staff, in conjunction with how we look at and view social media. But that may be a topic for another day.
Yeah, and I would say on that, I mean, I know of instances where teachers had private Facebook groups that were very productive and had great exchanges of ideas. But at the same time, that's potentially problematic. And I think there are plenty of stories in the news where social media leads in directions that are gateways to serious problematic behavior, and couple that with an inability to investigate that in a way that if we want to see what those posts are, we can get to them. I think we're asking for trouble. And we'll get it eventually.
As far as training of staff, my annual training does tell staff that the expectation is that they are not to friend students. They are not to have relationships online with students that parents don't have access to and aren't aware of. So all communications with students should be on our Schoology, on their school email, on their school Twitter if they're using it, but not private messages with students. So that's not included in our handbook. I'm actually looking at that now because I thought we had included something.
And that is, by the way, where we landed with our policy previously, was that everything had to be open. And there couldn't be private Facebook groups. There couldn't be private Instagram groups. It had to be a public group that anybody could see and be a part of.
And our employee handbook does say at page 45 that home or private accounts should not be used for student and family contact. So in those instances, when we would be asking a staff member for social media, I can conceive of a situation where we've heard from a parent or student that a staff member reached out on a social media platform to the student and here's what I've seen or here's what I know about. And we'd want to say, it's our understanding you've contacted our student. We'd like to see what information you've exchanged with the student who you have access to based on us employing you.
Ms. Russell?
So I think one of the things that I have a concern about with regard to a policy, I guess, that would get into social media acceptable use or anything, I think that there's a free speech issue that we need to really be concerned about too. And just, coming from the public or the private sector, I just think that it's a very slippery slope in terms of being able to dictate what someone can and can't say. And I mean, even if it's critical of the organization, I don't think that I don't know. I just think it's a very slippery slope, and it would be very hard to put our arms around it. And I think with regard to the policy on contacting students, privately, messages, et cetera, it seems to me, Ms. Minson, that would fall under more of, and I don't know exactly which policy it is, but I guess just fraternization with students in general. And so that kind of falls into a different category than the acceptable use of social media with regard to what someone's broadcasting out to the public.
Yeah, and you also get into when there's communications with staff members using private accounts, if they're going to be communicating with parents or students on private accounts, even if it's nothing untoward, that could create a record under FOIA or FERPA that then we need to have access to so that we can provide it in response to a request. So there's a lot of reasons that I see there's a second place in our employee handbook under use of technology where the expectation is that staff utilize FCCPS accounts exclusively when corresponding via email with students and families regarding school issues, and that staff not utilize personal accounts as vehicles to communicate with students and with families.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really concerned about this policy. I'm just going to be really blunt about that. I understand there are plenty of reasons why it might be a really helpful thing to have access to that sort of information, especially if there is a concern about a threat to a student or inappropriate contact or something like that. And I get all of that entirely. I want to be really clear about that. But we're asking for access to something that could be completely private. I can think of lots of legitimate reasons why a person would have a social media account that they use privately to share information with family members only, for example.
Yes.
That I wouldn't want my employer to know about that sort of thing sometimes, right? I mean, there could be personal medical situations. There could be situations with circumstances related to family. Somebody is trying to have a family and can't. I mean, there's a whole host of things I could think of that are completely legitimate that I don't think anyone would want to have shared. So that really worries me. I also do understand, though, the argument that there are circumstances where having that information is really critical to be able to determine whether there's a threat, and I get that entirely. So I don't know how you find a balance between those two things, and I've spent most of the last several days struggling with how do you find a balance on this particular question, to be quite honest. There are some things that it could, and I know, and I will say, I recognize this model policy is more or less almost, but not quite, verbatim out of the Virginia Code.
Right.
There's one element of the Virginia Code that really isn't in here, and it gets to a point that Mr. Castillo made, so we can talk about that in a minute. But for instance, the first line says that the school board does not require current or prospective employees to disclose this information. And then it says, going further down, that in the next paragraph, the board would not be using the information to gain access if it inadvertently came through the network, and we got this. And then further down in line 16 and beyond, it doesn't prohibit the school board from requesting an employee to disclose, et cetera, if it's reasonably believed to be relevant, right? So I think the thing that I would actually be a lot more comfortable with is a policy that says the school board, I don't know if it's forbids or enjoins or what the right verb is, but says, no, you're not allowed to ask for it except in the following sorts of circumstances. I think that, to me, is more of a balance that I'd be more comfortable with. But I really am just speaking from my own personal perspective on this one. I can certainly think of things where we would say, yeah, no, the policy should allow folks to now be asked under a certain set of circumstances. It's just that I think the default setting ought to be, no, you're not allowed to ask, except if X.
Right.
And then I guess the other thing that might be a way of helping to solve a little bit of the discomfort I've got, I'm not sure that this really gets there, I'm just trying to think through this, is if it were not someone from the schools that was actually looking at the material. In legal cases that I know of, there have been situations where a private account is being accessed to understand some legal problem, and the court appointed somebody to be sort of the gatekeeper, an independent person who had the expertise necessary to say, well, yeah, that's not really personal, or yes, that really is. And only the things that mediator said should be accessible to whatever the prosecuting group was, those things went, but the other ones didn't. If there was some way to do something like that, that might be a way of dealing with a little bit of my discomfort. But I just have to say, I've really been wrestling with this one for the last few days, and it really worries me. So,
I certainly understand your concerns. I do think that the lines at 19 to 23 do severely limit the situations in which an employee's social media username and password could even be asked for, and it truly is when there's a formal investigation or related proceeding that there's been a violation of federal, state, or local law, or the school board's written policy. So there's a narrow time when this could come up. In my estimation, the time that it would take to get an independent third party to get in to review it, often there would be spoliation. So we'd lose the opportunity to see what's there in the first place. So that would be my concern with putting that protection in place, or putting something that would require hiring someone to come in to do a review.
I guess to tack on to what Mr. Anderson had to say, reading through this policy, I guess I'm just trying to understand what the objective is, what we're trying to accomplish with it. And from what I can tell, it's just giving us the right to be able to get into somebody's social media account. And I guess I'm just trying to figure out when this policy would necessarily be relevant. I don't know, it seems like it's a little bit tricky to me in terms of what we're trying to accomplish with it.
So in my experience, there have been a number of times where we've had accusations of an employee engaged in predatory behavior, sexual predator behavior, that required an investigation. And we asked for their social media information, and when they gave it voluntarily, not in the City of Falls Church, and when they gave it voluntarily, what we found was there was a ton of grooming behavior that had happened previous to that experience that we were able to then determine that what had happened. And so that's the value of being able to ask for it, is that it helps us confirm in many cases when there's been really horrific behavior by a staff member. And in those circumstances, it was exceedingly helpful to be able to have that information.
I guess I'm just looking at this in terms of if the employee refuses, then what? I mean, so this policy obviously gives us the right to ask, but I guess I'm just wondering what would prevent us from asking even if we didn't have a policy. And then on the flip side of that, what's preventing an employee from refusing other than saying there's I don't know, I'm trying to figure out the relevance of just having it in place in general, because if there's an investigation and if we have probable cause to be looking at these things, just like anything else, that we would, obviously the employee would say, yes, I'm going to provide you with the information, or no, I'm not. And that would dictate, where we would probably go from there.
So in this particular circumstance, we wouldn't need probable cause. We could leverage reasonable suspicion. So if we had a suspicion that something was going on, and there's an investigation of an employee going on, and we ask them for the information and they say no, that's certainly within their purview. Oftentimes in those moments, an employee will say, sure, here's the information. And it just is helpful in sort of either corroborating or not, whatever the allegation could be. If they were to say no, and we had reasonable suspicion, we would refer it to Child Protective Services anyway, who then potentially could go out for a warrant and with the police, and then they could get a warrant, a search warrant, to get that information if they achieved probable cause, that standard for making the case. So it's just another, and I think the language that Ms. Minson said, it's an arrow in the quiver. It's just one more thing that we have an opportunity to ask for that helps us in an investigation of something absolutely tragic. And I think the scope of the timing and the actions that we would ask that information would be extremely narrow. So I don't know how to add language to it that would narrow it even more. But it does seem to me that if we think that there's a violation of state or federal law or school board policy, that should be sufficient for us to be able to have that authority to ask the question, can we have your social media? Can we have access to your social media? And the employee could certainly say no, and that's well within their rights.
Right, and I guess, what I'm just referring to is even if we didn't have the policy, that would be within our rights because we're needing to protect our children. So I guess I'm playing the Phil role since he's not here and just questioning, do we need a policy? Because these are all things, all actions that we would take, regardless of whether we had a policy in place, because that's our responsibility to protect our children. So I don't know, I'm not saying I disagree with the policy, but I'm just trying to, I guess, in my mind, understand if there's even a need for it, because I think in some ways, as we've talked about before, policies can kind of tie our hands if they don't have the specific language or, phrase or whatever. But, with the absence of policy, I think that frees us up a little bit more.
It's an interesting question and a good point. I think the main reason that we would want a policy, at least from a school superintendent perspective, is if that investigation were to go sideways, I would want to be able to say, we had the school board's policy behind us that allowed us to ask that information. And being able to speak from that perspective puts us in a stronger position.
And in my experience advising other divisions before coming here, when this did come up, and a school board employee was asked for their social media password and said, well, that's private. This is the law in Virginia, so that school board had a policy that had this word for word that said, there is a formal investigation, we are allowed to ask you for that information. There's a school board policy that allows us to ask for that, and that did result in getting the password information. The other important piece I think that we haven't talked about is lines 21 to 23 that says that if the school board does exercise this right, if the school board does ask for the login and password, it's only used for the purpose of the formal investigation or the related proceeding. So not just can it only be asked for if there's a formal investigation or a believed violation of state, federal, local laws or policy, but it's only used for the narrow purpose of looking into that concern. So it's not otherwise going to be something that is made public or is otherwise available or is used for any other reasons.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kind of taking on what you just said, and I hear the concern from my other two colleagues, but if there's that literally narrowed usage of that, to me, it kind of protects and makes sure that when and if we ask for that, that we are only looking at specific things within that social media that only apply to what we would be investigating, so that we're not making the effort to do the deep dive into a person's personal life, but we're looking only at the particular issues that have been brought to our attention that has risen to us to even ask for that. I agree. As an employee, I wouldn't want my employer to just be able to just walk up and say, "Hey, Lawrence, I need your username and password for any of your social media things." But I get it sometimes if someone has, or some type of accusation has come up that involves something with any of our students. I think that is a reason to potentially, in a limited scope, research and look at that particular information, not necessarily going beyond that limited scope of what we are trying to see if a staff member has inappropriate contact or communications with a student. That's not my thought, but it is complicated because social media does change so quickly. It makes it, we're always going to be 2 steps behind where those things are happening. And I think this is always going to be something that's going to be coming up and ever evolving of what we're going to have to do with these type of policies.
I'll just add my 2 cents worth. I guess I actually feel comfortable with it as written. I think if we go too far the other direction in prohibiting having a username and password, in some cases it could almost be detrimental to the employee. I think there could be cases where somebody says something, they want a way to show, kind of clear their name. So I guess I feel this is narrow enough that I feel comfortable with it as written.
And I spoke with Mr. Anderson earlier today about his concerns, and I understand where he's coming from, and I think he brings up a lot of really good points. But much like Ms. Liddon, I do feel comfortable with this, given the narrow scope as outlined in lines 16 through 23. Gives me comfort that as a division, we won't be just requesting this without very significant reasonable belief that there is an issue, and that we think that looking at that social media account will help us in the investigation. Is not just a fishing expedition. Mr. Castillo.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And I think we have a tail, but we don't have a dog here, because we're talking about, first of all, why should it be limited to social media accounts? Why not email as well? And we're not talking about what kind of use and communication we're worried about. I think we would have a much stronger policy for accessing things if we had a stated policy for what was prohibited. And I think, getting back to, you have to understand, social media today is the coin of the realm for communications. We have tools left, right, and sideways for communications at FCCPS. I think we would be sitting in a much better place to prevent problems as well as to address problems if we set out very clearly whether and how social media is to be used for communication, because then that would give us a much stronger basis for saying when those rules are broken, how we deal with that. Right now, we're operating in a vacuum, and I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. And the kicker is, of course, we can just ask, and it doesn't have any force behind it. So to me, it's a milquetoast solution to a non-problem, because we haven't really addressed the real problem. But other than that, I think it's great.
Thanks, everybody. I think I certainly understand that it would be another tool in the quiver and make things make it possible for, in the circumstances that are narrowly scoped here, to be able to go and see and try to, in some cases, perhaps clear an employee of an accusation. In some cases, it would actually provide really critical information in the other direction. I think it's a balance between privacy and protection of our students. And I think as it's written, it doesn't go far enough for me to be comfortable with the protection of the privacy. And so if there are things we can do that maintain the protection for other employees, for students and staff, but also are providing privacy protections. There's nothing in here that says, right, there's nothing in here that says an employee doesn't have to say yes if asked. And the Virginia Code doesn't say that either. What the Virginia Code says is that the employer is prohibited from taking any effectively retaliatory action against somebody who says no. I don't know if that gets to the point, Mr. Castillo, that you raised earlier about, do we want to tell them that they can say no? But anyway, it's what the Virginia Code says. I think it's one of these things where it says we don't require employees to do this. We aren't prohibited from viewing publicly available information, and I have absolutely no problem with that. If it's public, it's public. That's fine. But I think if it were more the dial were set, you're only allowed to ask for it in the cases that are laid out in 19 through 23, I'd be more comfortable than I currently am. I'm not sure I'm still comfortable enough, but if it said, this is the only circumstance under which we would do that. And then perhaps if the policy were to go forward and if there were a regulation developed to implement it, one of the things is, I suppose, a mitigation is if it said very specifically, who would do the looking? I'm just going to be really blunt. I wouldn't want my supervisor to look at social media stuff because there's things in there that don't necessarily want my supervisor to know about, and they can't unknow it once they've seen it, no matter how careful they are. I mean, that's just humanity, right? It's not that I don't trust my supervisor. I actually do really like the guy. But anyway, the issue is just for me, if there's a way to build in protection that separates the person doing the looking from anywhere in the direct chain, I don't know how to do that. So this is where I get to the point where I would just say I think this needs some more thinking before I'm going to be comfortable with it. But I am listening to everything everybody said, and I've heard it, and I'm definitely taking this one through. But I've been wrestling with this one for several days. So anyway, thank you very much.
Madam Chair, I know she's new, and I don't want to put her on the spot, but Ms. Singley, do you have any thoughts about this? You can say, could I get back to you, but I think you could help us understand some things better with your perspectives. And you should never hesitate to pipe up when you need or want to.
Can I get back to you on that, actually? Sorry.
Well, so what we can do then is we can do the motion. We'll bring this back for second reading. And if anyone is not comfortable with first reading, you can, of course, say no, say nay when we do the motion. Yeah. Or abstain.
Yes, I certainly. We'll also go back and sort of try to muddle through some of the feedback that we've heard tonight. I know that there are some folks that are comfortable the way that it is, and some folks that aren't. And if there is a way to kind of come to a place that serves all of you well, we might try to find that place. I don't know if we're going to be able to, but we'll give it a shot. But going through first reading gives us a chance to at least have it on the docket for second reading next time.
Okay, well, we will go forward with the motion. Would someone please move to approve first reading of the policies discussed? Thanks, Ms. Rosen.
I move that the school board approve first reading the following policies: GBEC, JFCH, KGC, tobacco products and nicotine vapor products, and policy GAD, access to employee social media accounts.
Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Ms. Litton. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
And I'll vote nay as well.
Or abstain? All right, and so we'll move on to first reading, but the opposition is noted, and we will be looking into the policy more. Thank you. Next on the agenda, section 8.01, future agenda items. Any future agenda items? Mr. Webb?
Just one, and it may be something for us to discuss at the Thursday, is it Thursday, work session / retreat that we're having, being that it is now after July 1st, and we can officially have a conversation about potential starting school early, and at least have a community conversation about that, of what that could look like and what some of the folks here in town's thoughts are about that before we get too far into it and starting looking at calendars for the next school year and see if this is something that folks are interested in. I know this is something that, I guess 2 years ago was a question at one of the council debates, and that the students were asking about it, and just something I think that we should probably at least have a general conversation about and go and just see where that leads us, so that if we, as a community, are open to that, better sooner than later to do that.
Oh, I was just going to say, I know Dr. Noonan and I have met with the PEAK committee, and they've provided a fair amount of feedback, so I don't know if it would make sense, Dr. Noonan, to just talk high level about some of the feedback that they've come up with and share that with the board.
Well, first of all, thank you for raising that as a topic. We actually have started to map out what the work sessions in the future are going to look like, and we have it slated into a work session already. The August retreat was not necessarily a time that we were going to talk about it, but that's certainly something we can modify and adapt. I did present it, or have had a number of ongoing conversations with the PEAK group around this topic, and my charge to them was to help us think about how do we talk about it in a way that makes sense. And so they've been very helpful in sort of talking through not only how we might be able to talk about it, but also look for some exemplar schedules that are out there that are prior to the pre-Labor Day start. And so they did go out and did some research. And again, this isn't to start the ball rolling towards a pre-Labor Day start. It was to gather information to see if there was a schedule out there that seemed to make sense. And there were a number of threshold measures, if you will, that sort of needed to make sense, needed to be there for it to make sense. So for example, if we did a pre-Labor Day start, they didn't want to go till June 15th. Which is when we end now. So the presumption is if we go earlier, that we would end earlier. One of the things, another sort of threshold measure for them was, did the quarters make sense? And was there a possibility to end the second quarter by winter break? And so they went out and they looked for some schedules that perhaps would be able to end the quarter at winter break. One of the threshold measures which was not achievable is to end by Memorial Day. Some school divisions around the country are able to do that, but they start really early in August. We wouldn't be able to start that early. But some of the other things they were looking at is, what does it mean with respect to the testing schedule? And how does it line up to more closely align with some of the international schools that are offering the International Baccalaureate testing? How would it impact SOL testing? How would it impact instructional programming for kids? And then, so they're starting to look at some of those things, and they've brought some of that information back. When we did do the calendar last year for next year, when we sent out the 2 options or 3 options, you might recall that we added a question in there: if we could start before Labor Day, would that be something you'd be interested in? And I believe the number was around 62%, said that the staff, anyway, that took that poll would be interested in starting earlier. So that was just good information for us to have. It doesn't mean one way or the other. It just was good information. And I would imagine that part of it is relying on how good is the schedule going to be that's created around that as a possible pre-Labor Day start. So I do think for us to make a change for the 21-22 school year, we would need to make a decision as a team based on community feedback, teacher feedback, student feedback by no later than roughly December for the 21-22 school year. So that's something else to consider. And oh, by the way, that's right about the time we'll be moving into a new high school. So that also comes into play in terms of how does that all weave together with the construction schedule. So as we engage in this conversation, depending on how much input we get and how much communication we receive, it might be one of those decisions that you all may say, you know what, let's take a little bit longer and maybe not look at it for 21-22, but maybe look at it for 22-23. But the good news is you have that flexibility now. You didn't have the flexibility before, so now you have the flexibility so long as you give that 4-day weekend at Labor Day.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think one other thing that would be useful to look at is how an earlier start would affect sports. I mean, August 5th, I think, is the notional date now. So if you started before Labor Day, would people be asked to show up in late July? Would that move back with the start time, or would there be some overlap? I don't know the answer to that, but that would be worth exploring.
So that's a good question. VHSL, the Virginia High School League, is the group that governs that typically. So schools that are starting before Labor Day actually are starting on the same day as those schools that are starting post-Labor Day. So for example, in Fairfax County, even though they're starting pre-Labor Day, their first workout day is August also. So those are good questions to consider, though, as we think about it. And there's field use issues, and there's pool use issues, and there's all kinds of other things that sort of are interwoven into all of that as well. Good point.
Yeah, and I think, to some extent, our students are literally, many students in high school get a 6-week summer break. And that might be good for some people, and other people might want more of a summer. I don't know the answer.
Well, so to clarify, if we started earlier and ended earlier, then those students who do sports would get a longer summer. Because right now, we're coming back later, and they still have to come back August 5th, even though we start later than some of the other schools. Is that right?
Presuming that the
Oh, if that doesn't
VHSL
change.
and all things don't change, yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah.
And I'm trying to think now, I have a nephew who is here in Virginia, and their school starts back in mid-August, and I want to say his preseason football conditioning stuff starts at some point in the next week or two. So I do think they start a little bit sooner than that August 5th date, but I'm not sure exactly how and what they work. But I know they start, because when I was at home over the weekend, I was asking him about that, and I know he starts fairly soon of the two-a-day practices.
Well, it sounds like this is definitely a rich topic for a future agenda item. Just to follow up on Mrs. Henderson's email from today, it just made me think, like, do we need to look at our broader division-wide dress code policies, and are they up to date, and are they current with, all students? We have students who identify as different genders now, or maybe are transgendered. So to make sure not just that it's not just our girls who are being called out for wearing for an 8-year-old wearing spaghetti straps, being told that she has to change because she's too provocative, all the way up through high school. So I don't know if that is a division-wide issue that we should examine as a board, or once it's worked through at the lower levels, at the building levels. Any other topics? Yes, Mr. Castillo?
Hey, Madam Chair, I came across an article in Education Week a couple of weeks ago about privacy and school monitoring tools and how students' data is collected by some school divisions and analyzed. And in addition, there are vendors as well, for example, Google, who amass information as service providers to our students. I think it would be interesting and helpful to look at and understand what kind of data is collected, looked at, used for what purpose, so we can understand that in greater depth. And I can circulate the article so you can see some of the things that are out there that are pretty extraordinary. And it's a two-way street as well, which is the interesting part. So I think that and an ongoing insurance that we are protecting our students' data, I think is really important.
All right. Any other future agenda items right now? All right. Seeing none, we'll move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Noonan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in response to sort of the three topics that came up, one of the things we are going to present to you in the August retreat is how are the topics lining out across the next 12 months of work. And so what we'll do is we'll take those three items and we'll start to weave those in also as possible topics at different times throughout the year. So there'll be a home for some of those ideas as well. Just a couple of things that I've already touched on summer programs earlier this evening, but I do want to take just a second to say that the buildings and office moves are now complete. And everyone has a place to call home, which is really nice. And I do want to send out a special thanks to Sevi Padilla and his really hardworking crew, and Kristen Michael for her work masterminding the cascading series of events that got TJ, Mount Daniel, central office, and Henderson moves all complete in a way that made sense, was as smooth as it possibly could be, and we're really excited. So we're excited to be in our new home also in central office. So thanks to them. Central office is almost complete. I think we will have most of our punch list items done by the end of next week. We should have working restrooms by the end of the week, we're hopeful. But those are really close, and looking forward to continuing to have more meetings there. Fireworks at 4th of July went off without a hitch. It appeared anyway from being there. People were able to walk on the new access path through the Virginia Tech site, and I think it went really, really nicely. We have a small cohort of new teachers this year, and our 12-month staff are starting to get ready for their orientation and mentorship for this coming year. There'll be a few unexpected, there have been a few unexpected resignations this past month, but we've relaunched our search process and are seeking out those positions right now. Check your Twitter account in the next couple of days. We will be posting some things out there too. So if you know somebody that's really good that could be part of the Falls Church City Public Schools family, we would welcome them. And then just a quick note about the flooding yesterday. With the downpours, the whole region really suffered from unprecedented rain in just a half an hour. I saw yesterday parts of Arlington County, and I would submit part of the City of Falls Church, got 4.5 inches of rain in an hour. I heard that Washington National Airport exceeded their 24-hour total for rainfall historically in 25 minutes. So that's pretty amazing to me. But at the height of the storm, I say all that because I just want to make sure everybody knows at the height of the storm, every building in the City of Falls Church public school system had some water in it. And because of Sevi's great team and really quick staff, they were able to gear up quickly, get it clean out all the clogs and the puddles along the way. As just a very quick note, there is some information out there that there was more water on the Mary Ellen Henderson gym floor. And there was a little bit of water on the gym floor, just like there was in all the schools, but it verified and confirmed that we bought the right floor this time. So it's all cleaned up, and we were back in play today. So happy to share that. That's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. We'll move on to our board and student liaison comments, and I will start with my left, Mr. Castillo. Or I could start with Niharika. Do you have any comments? I'm going to go all the way to the left.
Well, I just want to say, I just want to say that I'm really looking forward for this year, and I'm really honored to be here. It's been a great meeting. And also just to add on to the social media comment, I just want to say that I agree with what Mr. Anderson was trying to get at, that I just don't think that social media is something that anyone should have access to, especially if an employee wants to have it be private, and it should only be looked into if there's a really emergency situation. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but I just feel like it's really private and it shouldn't be public at all, or it should only be looked into if it's an emergency. Or sorry, I'm really nervous right now.
No, you're doing great. Thanks so much. Okay, Mr. Castillo.
Nothing to report tonight.
Nothing from me either.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to reiterate the thanks from earlier for all the hard work that went into all the land transfer agreements and everything there. But and I would also like, though, to say thank you to Dr. Noonan for the very nice email that you sent, thanking the city staff and all of our partners over there, because there's been a lot of joint work this year, and it's been really good to see. So thank you for that. And then just a heads up for everybody to remember that on the 22nd of August, we'll be having a special sort of two-part meeting. There'll be the standard meeting, and then there'll be the retreat/work session to talk about governance in the general frame of International Black Laureate and how we do IB in the schools. And there'll be an agenda coming out shortly, and please, we'll be starting early so that we can have good discussions before everybody's time to head off and do other things. So be on the lookout for that. So thank you.
It wouldn't be a meeting if I didn't give an update from the Falls Church Education Foundation. So my update for this time is they're currently not meeting during the summer, but they do have the Run for the Schools on September 15th. And Debbie Hiscott has already formed her planning committee, so if anyone knows anyone who might be interested in serving on that, the meetings are bright and early at 7:30 a.m. So, yeah, just let me know or Debbie know if you're interested, but otherwise just plan on marking that date and hopefully everyone participates.
No comments for this evening.
And I will just comment that My son and my oldest son and I volunteer with Welcoming Falls Church a lot. We go to their food pantries together. So I was aware of this book for a while from Mr. Boson, from Paul. And it's a great book. So if anyone here would like my copy, because I have already read it, please come up and grab it from me after the meeting. It's really a wonderful book. And the work he and Hannah Jordan have put into bringing the author to the city have just been fantastic, and they just have so much energy and excitement around it. So I hope everyone will participate in the events and read the book in your time. It's a fast, fun read. I mean, fun is a relative term, but it's a fast, good read. So thanks for considering. We have some minutes to approve. I would ask for unanimous consent to approve the minutes of June 27th, 2019. No objections, so ordered. And please review our enrollment, our list of events representation, and if there's nothing else, then we are adjourned.